President Trump says the United States is helping in the investigation of a missing Saudi journalist who disappeared in Turkey. Jamal Khashoggi was critical of Saudi Arabia's government in columns he wrote for the Washington Post. He disappeared 1 week ago from the country's consulate in Istanbul. Saudi officials deny any involvement in the writer's disappearance. Turkish officials say they feared he was murdered. The president says he wants to find out what happened. Earlier this month, Saudi Arabia's religious police met with a delegation from the United States for the first time ever. Our next guest is a religious freedom advocate who took part in the meeting. Joining me now for an update is Johnnie Moore, Commissioner with the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom. Johnnie, welcome back to the program.
It's good to be back.
There's a lot of focus on Saudi Arabia and the government, obviously, with the missing Saudi journalist. You visited Saudi Arabia recently in the end of September. What were your impressions in talking with the Saudi government, and why do you think they were so much more open to talking with you, a religious freedom advocate?
Well, look, I mean, there's a trend in the region where when it comes to general freedom of speech and freedom of conscience, there's a decline, a rise in totalitarianism. But on the other side of the coin, when it comes to religious tolerance and peaceful coexistence and even religious freedom, the peer pressure is in the opposite direction. It's actually moving in a positive direction. And there are plenty of things that we're looking into. We haven't drawn all of our conclusions yet. But this particular meeting that you mentioned was a historic first. For the first time ever, a U.S. delegation met with the religious police that have been taken off the streets, their batons taken away. They can no longer interrupt private worship services, no longer go into the sanctity of someone's home. It's a sign that maybe it's possible to have religious freedom in Saudi Arabia. That's, to my surprise, I left saying to myself, this could actually happen, despite all the other complexities that we're well aware of.
Saudi Arabia, of course, is still labeled a country of particular concern for more than 10 years because of religious freedom violations. Just give me an overview. What are some of those violations, and what is the progress trying to be done to stop them?
Well, listen, when you talk about religious freedom, you talk about a few things. The ability to worship publicly and privately. You know, that's at the very heart of it. And the ability to convert, to change your beliefs about something without repercussions. So when you boil it down to a very simple perspective, these are the types of things that we're looking for. And it's true. I mean, you know, on the peninsula, there still isn't a church in all of Saudi Arabia, not one church. And yet, when I sat down with the Minister of Islamic Affairs and I said, you know, I asked him the question, could there be another religion on the peninsula? Because in every single meeting before with the Ministry of Islamic Affairs, by any USERF delegation, the answer's always been the same. The Hadith says there can be only one religion on the peninsula. This Minister of Islamic Affairs said something different. He got fire in his eyes. He said, that is a wrong interpretation of the Hadith. And he explained how they have this project to fix these bad interpretations of the Hadith. And I'm sitting there thinking, wow.
Didn't think this was ever going to be possible.
I didn't think I was going to hear this out of someone like this. So, you know, we have to be cautiously optimistic, our eyes wide open. A lot of work needs to be done, but there's a glimmer of light.
You alluded to earlier the fact that human rights are connected to religious freedom rights and social reforms, for example. So, for example, lifting the ban on women drivers, how do you think that sort of impacts religious reform?
Well, it makes everything else easier. And by the way, when the population doesn't respond in a negative way, it makes these other potentially more controversial religious reforms easier. And so not only are women driving and not wearing veils, I actually sat in a meeting with a young woman who wasn't veiled that disagreed with the man in the ministry leading the meeting, and she had an open discussion and argument with him. That would not have happened not long ago. So, you know, again, despite everything else going on, we need to positively reinforce the good changes, and they're real, and they're effective, and they're coming, and yet we can't let them off the hook in these other areas.
Very good. Well, like I say, it's a subject we're going to continue to follow. I know you guys will continue to talk with your counterparts over there. Johnnie Moore, Commissioner with the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.